Persia is not just ancient, it's eternal. While modern maps label it as Iran, the soul of Persia never vanished. It's a land where myth meets history, where empires rose and prophets walked. And yet, in 1935, a name change altered the world's perception. Persia became Iran, and with that, an identity seemed to fade. But did it really? Beneath the headlines about sanctions and nuclear standoffs lies a forgotten heritage. This is the same land that once crowned kings like Darius and Xerxes, nurtured spiritual visionaries like Zoroaster, and created empires that shaped the ancient world. So let's peel back the veil and rediscover what was never truly lost. Because Persia didn't disappear, it transformed. Iran's history doesn't just begin with kings and battles. It begins with stone tools and the dawn of humanity. Long before the Persian Empire, this land was a cradle of prehistoric life. Millions of years ago, early hominins like Homo erectus left behind pear-shaped axes in the Iranian plateau. Fast forward to 50,000 years ago, and Neanderthals were carving out a life in its caves. Then came the Cro-Magnons. But here's what most people miss. Long before Persia became a household name, this land was already teeming with advanced civilizations. Excavations reveal that cities in Iran are just as old, if not older, than those in Mesopotamia. Cultures like Jiroft and settlements like Sialk prove that Iran was a major player in humanity's early story. So why isn't it recognized as such? Perhaps because history, like politics, is often shaped by power, not truth. The first kingdom to rise from this ancient soil was Elam, a name mostly forgotten outside academic circles. Centered in modern-day Khuzestan, Elam was Iran's first true civilization. It wasn't a side note in someone else's history, it was a force in its own right. Elam's capital, Susa, was older than Athens, Rome, or Babylon, and while Mesopotamian scribes recorded its existence, they also feared it. By 2600 BCE, Elamites were conquering Sumerian cities, but like all powers, they too were conquered, this time by the Akkadians. Yet even in defeat, Elam made history. When Naram-Sin of Akkad wrote a peace treaty with Elam, it became the world's first known international treaty. That's right. Iran was there not just at the beginning of civilization, but also at the dawn of diplomacy. Now, it's essential to understand that the Elamites weren't the same people we refer to today as Iranians. Ethnically and culturally, they were much closer to their Mesopotamian neighbors, like the Sumerians and Akkadians. The real Iranian identity begins to emerge later when tribes from Central Asia, or perhaps the Caucasus, migrated southward into the Iranian plateau. Historians believe this migration happened sometime between the 20th and 15th centuries BCE. These were the early Indo-Iranian tribes, and they brought with them new languages, customs, and spiritual beliefs that would eventually evolve into Zoroastrianism. Meanwhile, Elam still lingered, officially conquered by the Persians in 539 BCE, but far from erased. In fact, records show that Elamite envoys were still active well into the 1st century CE, including appearances in places as distant as Jerusalem. But by this point, the spotlight had shifted to the newcomers. The rise of the Iranian peoples began with a name that's often forgotten, but historically vital: Media. Around 670 BCE, the Medes established the Kingdom of Media in northwestern Iran. These were true Iranian tribes, and they proudly called themselves Aryans, an ancient term meaning noble, though the kingdom was short-lived by imperial standards, lasting only about 2 centuries. Its achievements were massive. The Medes played a central role in defeating the brutal Assyrian Empire, aligning with the Babylonians in a rare example of ancient coalition warfare. They expanded into Anatolia and the Caucasus, gaining control over parts of modern-day Turkey and Armenia. And yet their downfall didn't come from war or rebellion, it came from within. The Persian tribes, closely related to the Medes, rose under the leadership of a dynasty descended from a semi-legendary chieftain named Achaemenes. What followed wasn't a revolution, it was a family inheritance. In the 6th century BCE, the name Persia would eclipse Media forever, thanks to one man, Cyrus the Great. Born of both Mede and Persian blood, Cyrus united the Iranian tribes and launched an empire that would stun the ancient world. The Achaemenid Empire was born, and it wasn't just another regional kingdom. It was the first true superpower in history, stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. Despite absorbing the Medes, Cyrus never erased them. In fact, the cultural similarities between the two peoples were so strong that even Greek historians, who were obsessed with cataloguing ethnic differences, kept confusing them, calling Persians Medes long after. Media had vanished. This was more than empire building. This was the emergence of a civilization that would influence the world for centuries to come. To many, the story of Persia ends with the Greco-Persian Wars, as if a few Greek victories somehow shattered the Achaemenid Empire. But the reality is far more complex. Yes, the wars between 500 and 449 BCE were significant. Yes, the Greeks defended their homeland with unmatched courage. But from the Persian perspective, these battles were minor. Skirmishes on the empire's far western edge. They still ruled Asia Minor, the Levant, Egypt, and much of Central Asia. And what's often forgotten is that Persia later outmaneuvered the Greeks, not with swords, but with silver. During the Peloponnesian War, the Persians funded both Athens and Sparta at different times, playing them against each other. In 394 BCE, the Persian navy crushed the Spartans at the Battle of Cnidus, with an Athenian admiral, Conon, leading the fleet. Later, in 387 BCE, the infamous Peace of Antalcidas humiliated the Greeks and handed Asia Minor back to Persia. Ironically, what Xerxes couldn't win with 1,000,000 soldiers, his descendant Artaxerxes secured with a signature. Diplomacy, not war, gave Persia its quiet revenge, and even allowed them to retake parts of Egypt without a full-scale invasion. So, what did bring down this sprawling superpower? The answer lies in the very thing that made it great: diversity. The Achaemenid Empire was a patchwork of cultures, languages, and local rulers. As long as the central authority was strong, that worked. But when internal power struggles and weak leadership took over, cracks began to form. Enter Alexander the Great. In 330 BCE, he stormed through the empire with stunning speed, toppling what had stood for over 2 centuries. But Alexander's empire was short-lived. He died young, and his generals turned on each other. Out of this chaos, another Iranian people emerged, the Parthians, under Mithridates. In the 2nd century BCE, they revived the dream of Persian kingship, calling themselves the true heirs of the Achaemenids. For nearly 500 years, the Parthian Empire held firm. Yet unlike their predecessors, they were constantly pressured by Rome, which viewed them more as rivals than equals. In truth, the Parthians were caught between a memory of greatness and the shadow of rising empires. Real resurgence came with the Sassanids. Founded in 224 CE, the Sassanid Empire redefined Persian power. They centralized the state, sidelined local warlords, and made Zoroastrianism the official religion, cementing both political and spiritual unity. This was a new Persia, one that could stare down Rome and later Byzantium on the battlefield. Wars raged for centuries, mostly over strategic zones like Mesopotamia and Armenia. Cities changed hands, fortresses were built, burned, and rebuilt. But the Sassanids held their ground until they didn't. A brutal war with Byzantium in the early 7th century weakened them to the core. Just a few decades later, the Arab-Muslim armies struck. In 651 CE, the last Sassanid king was killed, and with him the Persian Empire, one that had lasted nearly a millennium, came to an end. Or did it? Because while the empires fell, the Persian spirit didn't. It adapted, it endured, and it waited for its next chapter. That's when the Arabs stepped in. With the Sassanid Empire crumbling, the Arab Muslim armies pushed through the weakened borders and conquered vast stretches of Persian territory. After the fall of Baghdad, the heart of Persia fell under Arab rule. The Umayyad Caliphate took shape, imposing Arabic as the administrative language and moving the capital to Damascus. At first, the system was surprisingly progressive. Non-Muslims, like Christians and Jews, were allowed to practice their faith, and merit, rather than lineage or religion, often determined positions of power. Science, philosophy, and literature blossomed. But the honeymoon didn't last. Over time, the state became more rigidly religious, and cracks began to appear. Rebellions broke out. New dynasties rose and fell like waves crashing on a shore: the Abbasids, Tahirids, Saffarids, Buyids, and many others. Each left its mark, but none fully tamed Persia. Here's what really matters. Persia never truly bowed to religious conversion. Christian emperors couldn't convert it. Islamic caliphs couldn't either. Persian identity remained intact beneath every occupying force. The language, Farsi, never died. In fact, it absorbed Arabic influence and emerged even stronger, becoming a literary powerhouse. Books, poetry, and scholarship continued to flow from Iranian pens. Even Zoroastrianism, the ancient fire religion of Persia, never vanished. It survived quietly, passed down through families and sacred texts, outlasting empires that tried to erase it. Persian culture proved to be made of something unbreakable, but Persia's trials weren't over. After the Arab rule fractured, new invaders arrived. The Turks came first, followed by the Mongols. In 1220, Genghis Khan descended on Iran with devastating force. Cities burned, populations were slaughtered, and the Mongol yoke settled over the land for more than a century. Then came Timur Tamerlane, a warlord who claimed to fight for Islam, but ruled through fear and destruction. Chaos became the norm. But amidst the ashes, a new dawn emerged. In 1501, Shah Ismail I founded the Safavid dynasty, finally reuniting the Persian heartland. There was even serious talk of renaming the empire in honor of the ancient Achaemenids, though it never came to pass. Still, the Safavids revived the ancient title Shahanshah, or King of Kings, and conducted an independent foreign policy. For the next 250 years, Persia stood tall again, but it wasn't an easy reign. Caught between the Ottomans to the west, Uzbeks to the east, and a rising Afghan threat from within, the Safavid Empire was constantly at war. Over time, the internal fractures became too much, and the dynasty eventually collapsed under the weight of endless conflict. A new power emerged in 1785, the Qajar dynasty. Ethnically Turkic, but thoroughly Iranian in culture, the Qajars came with bold ambitions. They aimed to restore Persia's former glory and for a while succeeded. They reasserted control over parts of the Caucasus, including Georgia and Armenia. But the empire's golden dreams clashed with harsh geopolitical realities. 4 brutal wars with an expanding Russian empire ended in humiliation. One by one, Persia lost Georgia, Dagestan, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. Entire provinces were signed away in treaties that left a permanent scar. The Qajars had hoped to be heirs to the ancient kings, but instead they became a cautionary tale of what happens when old empires meet modern powers. By the time World War I broke out, Iran was already fractured and vulnerable. It wasn't just a country, it was a chessboard in the imperial struggle known as the Great Game between Britain and Russia. Both empires carved out spheres of influence within Iran, turning the nation into a battlefield without declaring war. Even clashes with the Ottomans spilled onto Iranian soil. When Russia pulled out of the war after its revolution, Britain stepped in to tighten its grip, attempting a soft colonization through the 1919 Anglo-Persian Agreement. But it failed, sparking outrage among Iranians. Soon after, The newly formed Soviet Union made its move, backing communist uprisings and briefly establishing breakaway socialist states in northern Iran. And yet again, the Persian spirit proved resilient. Against all odds, Iranians reclaimed control of their land, refusing to be anyone's puppet. Enter Reza Shah Pahlavi, the man who would define modern Iran. A former military officer, he seized power in 1921 through a coup and declared himself Shah. His vision was clear: a strong, independent, and modern Iran. He pushed for industrialization, education reforms, and the secularization of the state. In 1935, he officially changed the country's international name from Persia to Iran, signaling a new era. But global politics had other plans. When World War II erupted, Iran tried to stay neutral. It didn't matter. The Allies invaded anyway, fearing German influence through the Shah. British and Soviet troops occupied the country, turning it once again into a pawn in someone else's war. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate, and Iran was pulled into Cold War politics, with the US, Britain, and the USSR all maneuvering for control behind the scenes. What followed was a series of coups, uprisings, and foreign-backed regime changes, each reshaping the nation's destiny. Then came the earthquake, the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The monarchy collapsed, and Iran became a theocratic republic led by clerics. This wasn't just a regime change, it was a seismic shift in ideology, power, and international alignment. The revolution sent shockwaves through the Muslim world and disrupted Western interests in the region. Almost immediately, the new Islamic Republic was tested. In 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq launched a surprise invasion, sparking one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. The Iran-Iraq War dragged on for 8 brutal years, ending in a costly stalemate and deepening Iran's resolve to remain independent at any price. Since then, Iran has walked a tense tightrope, sometimes a diplomatic player, sometimes a defiant rogue. Its geopolitical entanglements have included rivalries or clashes with the US, the USSR, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and even Ethiopia. The conflict never truly left, it just evolved. And now we're watching history repeat itself in real time. Tensions between Iran and Israel have escalated into open confrontation, with missiles and drones crossing borders in the shadow of broader Middle Eastern unrest. Iran isn't just surviving, it's asserting itself, refusing to be sidelined. Love it or fear it, Iran continues to shape the destiny of the region, from ancient kings to modern clerics, from Cyrus the Great to satellite-guided drones. This is a civilization that refuses to vanish. Thanks for joining us for this journey through 5,000 years of Persian history. If you found this video enlightening, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. What country or forgotten empire should we cover next? See you in the next episode.